95% of who we are is programmed.
That your body now knows how to do it better than your conscious mind. Transformation and what meditation actually can do for a person in terms of their biology and
like some of the sort of modern day manifestation community believe.
You wonderful human being, welcome back to the inner church, where I make the connection between what people say, do or have and their inner voice. Forget the complicated stuff that people tell you or sometimes even lie about. And also forget all the nice pimped videos you will find on YouTube. This channel only deals with the basic stuff and raw human conversations and the translation to the inner voice. Today I dive into a conversation between Dr. Joe Dispenza and the host of the great podcast, The Diary of CEO. Diary of a CEO, Mr. Steven. On, well, basically a follow-up on the secret, intention, mysticism, self-healing and well, just we have to take a look. It is basically a follow-up on the secret, intention, mysticism, self-healing and well, all those other things. Anyway, I reveal how this also is tied to the inner voice. So let's go.
95% of who we are by the age of 35 is programmed. When I read that in your work, it kind of hit me like a ton of bricks because I just turned 30. And if what you're saying there is true, without realizing it, there's a puppet master that sits above me that's calling the shots in a way that I don't think I've realized. Is that true?
I think if we define a habit as a redundant set of automatic, unconscious thoughts, behaviors, and emotions that's acquired through repetition. A habit is when you've done something so many times that your body now knows how to do it better than your conscious mind. Then it's programmed subconsciously. So then when the body knows how to do it better than the conscious mind, then for the most part, the greatest habit we have to break is the habit of being ourselves, right? So there's a principle in neuroscience that says that nerve cells that fire together wire together. If you keep thinking the same way, if you keep making the same choices, if you keep doing the same things, if you keep reproducing the same experiences and feeling the same emotions, your biology begins to become hardwired in a sense. It becomes programmed. So in order to change something, to arrive at a new vision of your future, if you wanted to arrive at a new goal or new vision of your future, you'd have to change something about yourself in order to get there. And you'd have to change the way you think, the way you act, and the way you feel. When you begin to become conscious of those unconscious thoughts, so conscious that you don't let them slip by your awareness unnoticed or unchecked by you. If you catch yourself speaking in a limited way, or you become conscious that you're behaving in a certain way, in a habit, and you can notice or pay attention to how you're feeling, then you're no longer the program. Now your consciousness observing the program, you're only unconscious when you're in the program, and so to change then is to become so conscious that you don't go unconscious again. And in a sense, that is consciousness that is really the puppet master that really decides who we want to be.
Okay, let me stop right here because there's a lot we need to unpack. But first, let's take a look at habits, consciousness and unconsciousness from a psychological standpoint. When we dip our toes into the profound pool of Carl Jung's theory of the psyche, we find a vivid distinction between the consciousness and the unconscious mind. Jung describes the unconscious as a repository of memories, thoughts, and experiences that are not actively at the forefront of our minds, but still influence our behavior and habits significantly. Understanding this can be a tool in reshaping our daily habits. Conversely, Sigmund Freud propounds a somewhat different perspective, focusing heavily on how unconscious thoughts shape our habits, which often bubble up from deep-seated desires or fears. By delving deep and bringing these unconscious thoughts to the conscious plane, Freud suggests that we can have a significant influence on reshaping our habits, steering them in a more favorable direction. Okay, now let's translate this complicated stuff to the inner voice, and also I will share my point of view about the inner voice. So they talk about a puppet master. He defines habits as a redundant set of automatic unconscious thoughts, behaviors and emotions that is acquired through repetition. That your body knows how to do it better than your conscious mind. So the greatest habit we have is to break the habit of being ourselves. Also the title of his book. When we translate this to the inner voice, habits, unconsciousness, consciousness are, in my honest opinion, just words we use to describe something. Let me focus on what a habit is. A habit is something that you have stored in your mind, and that whenever something happens, your inner voice just responds in a certain way. So, for instance, when you ride a bicycle or driving a car, then basically you will not hear your inner voice. But in the back of your mind, your inner voice is constantly telling you something. Let's go to the right. Let's go to the left. Let's drive faster. Or, oh, where should I go? Oh, watch out the traffic light. So all these things happen in your mind, but you're not conscious, aware of what your inner voice is telling yourself, because it's an automatic habit. It's so easy for you. So your mind doesn't have to come up and invent a new story. So it's like your inner voice is on autopilot, and it can be both or one of the two inner voices that we talk about in many of our videos. So what is conscious and unconscious? Conscious means that, for instance, you experience something new. There is input on your senses from the outer world, and that makes that your inner voice does the talking, and you're aware of this talking. Oh, what's that? Oh, what can I see there? It's your inner voice that is noticing the things. When it's unconscious, again, as I explained with the car, you doesn't have to notice the thing, so the talking in your head is on automatic pilot. When they talk about a puppet master, I can imagine that it feels like someone else is in control. But that's also a very strange sentence that someone else is in control of your mind. No, it's just your inner voice, and you're not aware of your inner voice. So it might feel like a puppet master is pulling the strings, but it's just your inner voice. And sometimes your inner voice, one of the two, the voice of insecurity or the voice of security, is pulling the strings. That's it. And then Joe talks about his book, Breaking the Habit of Being Yourself, which is a great book. But when you look at the sentence, breaking the habit of being yourself, it's all just a bunch of words. Breaking the habit. What he wants to say is that you can only change something if you do things differently. And of course, that's the only way you can make change happen. For instance, if I always go to the left and I want to go to the right, I have to break something, break going to the left, and that means that I will go to the right. But breaking the habit of being yourself, it doesn't make sense. You're still yourself. It's not just like, for instance, my name is Pijke, and Pijke always goes to the left, and then suddenly I break the habit and I'm not myself anymore, and I'm John, and John goes to the left or to the right. It doesn't make sense. So breaking the habit of being yourself is just you're taking control of your inner voices, and in one moment in time, for instance, the voice of insecurity is telling you you have to go to the left because on the right there's danger, and the voice of insecurity wants to run away from danger, and that's why you go to the left. If you want to break that, the only thing you have to do is be aware of which of the two inner voices is doing the talking. Is it the voice of insecurity or the voice of security? If I become more secure and there are processes how you can become more secure, then there is no need to go to the left, you can go to the right. So your inner voices control the direction of your life. So breaking the habit of being yourself is just taking control of your both inner voices. And we talk about in many of the videos how you can do that with the 5 transformations. So he also brings up neuroscience and states that nerve cells that fire together are wired together. So if you want to change, then you have to change something about yourself to get there. You have to change the way you think, the way you act, the way you feel. Become conscious, and you are only unconscious when you are in the program. Again, this feels like very complicated stuff. He brings up neuroscience as a way to claim authority, and that's a good thing. But changing a habit, changing, as I already explained, is just taking control of your 2 inner voices, and you will decide which inner voice does the talking. In 95% of all the people, the voice of insecurity, the voice that controls fear and all the uncertainty, unhappy and all those things, is doing the talking. And the voice of security, the voice that brings confidence, is not afraid, dares to do things, is the silent back voice in the back of your head. And with some work, some easy steps, the 5 transformations, you can take control of both inner voices and make sure that the voice of security, the voice that is oftentimes in the back of your head, becomes more dominant. And in the end is a balanced voice, because you need both voices, otherwise you would just cross a road and get hit by a car. So let's move on to the next part and let's see what they have to say about all the complicated stuff.
To get there.
Someone said to me that there's a certain type of behavior pattern that we can't change. They said when we get trauma under the age of 10, things that happen at a very early age, some of those things cannot be changed. And then there's things that happen later in life that can be rewired and changed. Is that true? Are there some traumas, behavior patterns that just appear to be too stubborn and too resistant to change?
If you asked me that question just a few years ago, I probably would have a different answer than I do today. Because if you look at a lot of the work that we're studying in terms of human change and human transformation, we've seen people with really difficult pasts, really brutal pasts that were abused and traumatized at a very early age, and then repeated traumas that took place in people's lives. And they had night terrors, and they couldn't be in relationships. They had social anxiety. They had a lot of health conditions. We've seen them completely change to be happy people again, to free themselves from the past. And so I would never put a limitation on change, because I just don't think you can really predict that. I think many people that are learning how to change, and they understand what they're doing and why they're doing it, and the how gets easier. I think for the most part, people can change all kinds of things. And when they do change, our research shows that their brain changes, their heart rate changes, their gene expression changes. There's thousands of metabolites that are being released into their bloodstream that weren't there prior. There's a host of different changes that take place biologically that kind of support the person's transformation.
Is there a specific transformation that sticks in your mind as being the clearest evidence that you should never write off someone's ability to transform?
Wow.
But first, a message of encouragement. The only way I can grow this channel is for you to simply hit that subscribe button and give this video a thumbs up. So can you please do that now? By doing so, together we both can explore a wide area of topics like faith, religion, Christianity, Judaism, spirituality, law of attraction, consciousness, atheism, human behavior and emotions, mindfulness, success, wealth, happiness, relationships, parenting, and even thought-provoking topics like identity politics, virtue signaling, cancer culture, diversity, gender, conspiracy theories, and politics. All through our unique inner church lens. Discover how the inner voice shapes conversations and gain the power to master your own inner voice, making your dreams come true. Thank you, and now back to the video. Okay, let's take a look at behavior patterns and human changing from a psychological standpoint. B.F. Skinner, a figure synonymous with behavioral psychology, provides a framework to understand behavior patterns through operant conditioning. He explains that behavior is a product of its consequences, and by modifying these consequences, one can influence and change behavioral patterns. On the flip side, Albert Bandura's social learning theories claims that individuals can change by observing and imitating others. This theory suggests a dynamic interaction between personal behavior and environmental influences, thus paving the way for a nuanced understanding of human change and adaptability. Okay, now let's again use the inner voice instead of all that complicated stuff, and let me know in the comments how your inner voice impacts your life. So, can we change our behavior patterns and heal our bodies? They talk about traumas, behavior patterns, human changing, and transformation. People that experience abuse are traumatized at a very early stage in life. People with social anxiety or that could not be in a relationship or have health conditions, and Joe says they have seen them completely change, be happy people again, to free themselves from the past. So he never puts a limitation, and that you can never predict the change that might happen. So when I translate all this stuff, in my opinion, the only way that people can change, if they have a trauma or experience social anxiety, what does it mean? It means that the voice of insecurity, the voice that controls fear, anxiety, is the dominant voice. So the voice of insecurity is doing most of the talking. And in these specific cases, with these people, you can say 95% of all the talking in their head is from the voice of insecurity. So how can you fix that? And can you predict an outcome? They will use, as they will point out later in the video, they will use meditation. But in my honest opinion, the only way you can fix that is with the 5 transformations. So people with high anxiety, first they have to become aware that they have an inner voice in their head. As long as they do not understand there is a voice that's speaking in their head, then they cannot change. So first they learn to listen to that inner voice, whatever it's telling them. I'm afraid, I'm this, I'm that, social anxiety. And then they learn to ignore that. Just completely ignore it. I will not listen. No, I will not listen. Ignore it. Then they have to be inspired and amused by that voice of insecurity. So laugh about all the things or be inspired. What actions can you take? Because sometimes the inner voice of insecurity is a voice that keeps you safe. So you must not ignore it, but be inspired. What can I do? What actions can I take? And then the third transformation is be guided by the voice of security. So when you are aware of the voice of insecurity and you can ignore it and you can be inspired and amused, then you're able to listen more to your voice of security and guide yourself more by that voice. And then you take action. You learn to take action despite the voice of insecurity. Action, go outside, do something. And in the whole process, you have to be aware of how the two inner voices work. And then the fifth transformation, after you've taken action, that's the fourth transformation, you understand that both inner voices will always be there. So you just have to befriend them. Let's get back to the video, what Joe is also telling. Because Joe also talks about massive changes like brain changes, heart rate changes, gene expression changes, bloodstream changes. As long as people believe in themselves, then you have the belief in possibility. So let's translate it to the inner voice. All the claims of actual changes in a human body, that can be because of many things. Change in diet, change in whatever, change in not smoking. So it's very complicated and hard to assign those changes to the change that you make in your mind. So that's about self-healing. But when I focus on a belief in yourself, belief in possibilities, of course things will change. And when I translate it to the inner voice, when your voice of insecurity that is doing the talking all the time goes down, the volume goes down, and the voice of security, the volume goes up, of course you will experience different things in life. And of course you will have a different outcome in life. So again, all the complicated stuff with the proof of how people can change can all be traced back to the simple and easy to understand explanation of the two inner voices. Let's get to the next part.
Uncommon.
When you recited that story, I could see the emotion in your face as you say it. And I can only imagine, with the information that you have and the beliefs you have about healing, change, transformation, the sense of urgency you must carry and the sense of like responsibility almost, I guess you must carry, knowing what's possible.
Yeah, well, I do feel responsible for always keeping the information based in science and as pure as possible. I feel it's really important to do the research that we're doing. I mean, we've studied so much from a scientific standpoint, the process of change and the process of transformation and what meditation actually can do for a person in terms of their biology and some of the changes that we're seeing just in 7 days. My responsibility really is to give people my greatest understanding of the truth and numerous opportunities to experience it, nothing more. You know, there is a way to inspire people into possibility. And so we combine different models of science, whether it's quantum physics or neuroscience or neuroendocrinology or psychoneuroimmunology, the mind-body connection, epigenetics, electromagnetism. All of these sciences allow people to understand themselves better. And if knowledge is power, knowledge about yourself is self-empowerment. You can empower people to do something with it. So the more you understand what you're doing in the process of change, the more you understand why you're doing it. As I said, the how gets easier. So we now know that if you give people sound scientific information, and that is the contemporary language of mysticism, and they can learn that information, they're basically making new circuits in their brain. That's what learning is. Learning is forging new synaptic connections. But if you don't review what you learn, if you don't repeat it, it's so much easier to forget it than to remember it. So you got to repeat it over and over again. So we allow people in our workshops to then begin to turn and teach it back to somebody. They have to really explain it. If they can't explain it, it's not wired in their brain, and something's going to be left to conjecture, to superstition, to dogma, to spirituality, and that's not the result we want. We want them to use science as that model, and if they can explain that model and remind themselves what they've learned, reproduce the same level of mind, nerve cells that fire together, wire together. So they begin to install the neurological hardware in their brain.
By teaching others.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay, let's first dive in self-healing and meditation from a psychological standpoint. John Kabat-Zinn, a pioneer in the field of mindfulness, brings forward the concept of mindfulness-based stress reduction. I talked about it in a previous video. This practice advocates the cultivation of a focused awareness on the present, allowing individuals to self-heal by releasing pent-up stress and fostering a deep-seated sense of tranquility. In line with this, psychologist Carl Rogers emphasizes a person-centered approach where self-healing takes center stage. According to him, each person has an innate tendency toward self-actualization and growth. Through meditation, individuals can tap into this intrinsic potential, fostering healing and personal development. Okay, now let's focus on the inner voice instead of all this complicated stuff. You can use the comment section below to share your experience with the inner voice to others. So, the science behind transforming yourself. They talk about self-healing, change, transformation, and meditation. And I quote, quantum physics or neuroscience or neuroendocrinology or psychoneuroimmunology, the mind-body connection, epigenetics, electromagnetism, and that all of these sciences allow people to understand themselves better. As you can see, a whole bunch of complicated words that neuroscientists have come up to explain all the things that happen in the brain. And when you look at the neuroscientists, you can look at them as, for instance, what is a clock? A clock is just simple giving you the seconds, minutes, and hours. And that's it. But when you dive into the clockwork, you can see a lot of complicated things. I think there are over 20,000 small pieces in a very complicated watch. All those different things have names because they have to be produced, people have to make them. So all those things have to have names. So neuroscientists come up with all complicated names, also because they do not want you to study neuroscience, and neuroscience should only be available to people who have a very high remembering skill, so they can remember all those complicated words. And that's one way to keep the rest of the people out of that market, for instance. But when you look at the clock, it's just seconds, minutes, and hours. And that's it. So when you look at the brain, in the end, what happens on a deep level doesn't matter. What for you matters is the two inner voices and how those inner voices shape your life. So it's just like E is mc quadrat. That formula from Einstein explains a lot of things in the world, and it's one of the most beautiful equations that there is out there, and that can explain the whole universe. It can explain the small things, the biggest things. E is mc quadrat. That's it. Very simple. And the inner voice is also very simple. It's the two inner voices. That's it. And with that, you can explain everything that happens in your life. So, another part, he talks about that if knowledge is power, knowledge about yourself is empowerment. And he brings up mysticism and that people are basically making new circuits in their brain. And that's what learning is. Learning is forging new synaptic connections. According to Joe, key is if they cannot explain it, it's not wired in the brain, and then change will not happen. Of course. So this is logic. So if you are not able to rewrite the story in your head, what your inner voice, the dominant inner voice, is telling you, then you're not able to change. So if your dominant inner voice, for instance, says, I am afraid of spiders. Oh no, look, a spider. I have to run. I'm afraid. If that's the story that your inner voice, the voice of insecurity, is telling you, then of course you will be afraid. But if you create a new story and a story that the voice of security can create, then you will not be afraid. How can it happen? For instance, if someone is an arachnophobic, I think it's called, someone who likes or doesn't like spiders, but my point is, if you your job is working with spiders. Then you become secure about what spiders do. You become interested in spiders. You even are able to let spiders walk on your hand. And that means that your voice of security becomes the dominant one when it comes to the spider part. So your voice of insecurity will lower and the volume of the voice of security will become much higher. And then you are not afraid of spiders. So the inner working of the two inner voices is what's the most important part. But let's get back to this very complicated video.
I've had lots of conversations with very smart people on this podcast from multiple disciplines, psychiatrists, psychologists, athletes, health practitioners, and they've given me such great advice which is irrefutable scientific advice on so many areas of my life. And for some reason, there's still areas of my life that I still can't act upon that advice. And I think probably for most of my listeners who've heard great advice on this podcast and they think, yes, that's who I want to be. I have an intention to stop eating sugar at 1 a.m. at night, or I have an intention to become organized or to be this kind of friend or partner. They have the information.
Right.
There's something stood in the way of me doing something about that information on a regular basis.
Yeah. Well, I can give you a few answers for that. Unfortunately, it normally takes crisis, trauma, disease, diagnosis, betrayal, loss. A person has to reach that lowest denominator where nothing's making that feeling go away.
Has to.
Well, they don't have to, but this is the human condition. This is the moment where they don't feel like returning the texts. They don't feel like going to dinner and seeing the same people. They don't feel like watching the same television show any longer. The sports car, the wardrobe, none of that is making this feeling go away. This is a moment of reckoning for the soul. And this is really when you could actually see yourself through the eyes of someone else because you don't feel like yourself anymore. And that's the moment where people begin to change. They can see how they've been thinking. They can notice how they've been acting. They could pay attention or become aware of how they've been feeling for the last 20 years. And that idea in neuroscience is called metacognition. That's the moment you're no longer the program. Now, what we believe and what we've seen and what I think is much better approach is being defined by a vision of the future. And if you understood that you could actually elevate your state without anyone or anything every single day and hold whatever that intention of your future is, and it takes a coherent brain to do that, and feel the emotion of your future before it happens. That is, you can't wait for your wealth to feel success. Or abundance. You can't wait for your new relationship to feel love. You can't wait for the mystical experience to feel awe or your healing to feel whole or grateful. That's kind of the old model of reality of cause and effect, waiting for something out there to change, to take away this emptiness, this lack that I feel in here. If you teach people, then they could elevate their state, and we teach that model through meditation. And they can combine that clear intention with an elevated emotion and teach them how to make that heart of theirs more coherent. If they do that properly, then they'll live their life feeling like their future has already happened. Now, from that elevated state, instead of that self-limited state, they can become as conscious of that unconscious self as they could if they were at that limited state, and being defined by that vision of the future, getting up every day inspired by it, and not letting any person, any circumstance, anything in our life remove us from that vision. That would be a day well lived. So then most people they have that vision of the future, but they give up on that vision because in order for them to arrive at that vision, they have to do something. They have to think differently. They have to act differently. They have to feel differently. And it's so much easier to make the same choice every single day. And the hardest part about change is not making the same choice as you did the day before. And the moment you decide to make a different choice, you're going to feel uncomfortable.
Okay, so first, what can be said about metacognition from a psychological standpoint? When we look into the fascinating world of metacognition, we draw upon the insight of psychologist John Flavel, who first coined this term. Flavel describes metacognition as the process of thinking about thinking, where individuals develop an awareness of their cognitive processes. And building upon this, psychologist Deborah Klinger emphasizes the therapeutic aspect of metacognition, suggesting that fostering this awareness can facilitate emotional regulation and resilience, allowing individuals to navigate complex thoughts and emotions with a deeper understanding and mastery. Okay, now let's translate this complicated stuff to the inner voice. And also, don't forget to share your thoughts about your inner voice in the comments below. So why can't we change ourselves? They talk about metacognition and that's the moment you are no longer in the program. You just need an intention or visualization of your future and feel the emotion of your future before it happens. The old model of reality, of cause and effect, waiting for something out there. And they teach this through meditation. And I quote, from that elevated state, instead of that self-limited state, they can become a conscious of that unconscious self as they could if they were at a limited state and being defined by that vision of the future. For me, as a simple mind, this is just some mumbo jumbo, some words that sound very impressive put together. Because where it all again comes down to is, are you willing to change your two inner voices? So according to them, something very stressful has to happen. There has to come a moment in time where you say, this is enough. I do not want to live any longer like this. And oftentimes this means that you then will seek help. And then the system can be implemented. The system of other people trying to help you. And of course, when you are at that ultimate low in your life, then people will respond to you. And then the whole system, the whole world will try to help you and get you out of the situation. Or then people will say, you have to change, you have to do that. And then you will reach out to others and perhaps pay them money so you can change. And then in the system and in all those processes, all those people will try to work with you and then you will make the change. Or you are so frustrated with your life, you cannot stand it anymore. And then there is light. It can also be because of faith or religion or whatever happens. But if we translate this to the inner voice, what does this mean? This means that your voice of insecurity is so loud that you're fed up with it. And you want to see change in your life. And the only way you can make that happen is by lowering that inner voice. So in my honest opinion, there is no need for a dramatic event in your life for you to make the change. That is just how the world at this moment in time is set up. And if people would understand, and if people are taught about the inner voice, and that's why I have this channel, to teach you about how things work in your head, not according to the current standards of society, where people only want other people to change if their life really is bad. No, if people become aware of the inner voice and how that impacts their life, then you do not need a dramatic event. You can change at any point in time. But let's focus on all those dramatic events and why sometimes, even though you hear all the stuff and you want to change, no change happen. The reason for that is you can go to any guru, go to Anthony Robbins, all those gurus who can help you change. As long as you do not start with changing your inner voice, no change will happen in your life. So you can learn about everything. You can learn about how the brain works. You can learn about what your core beliefs are. You can learn about habits, all those things. You can go to motivational speakers, motivational courses. As long as your inner voice does not change and your voice of insecurity is still the one that's doing talking, then nothing will change. You can learn all the stuff, but you first have to learn how your inner voice works. And when you work on your inner voice and you hit the 5th transformation, where you befriend your 2 inner voices, then and only then you can make all the changes happen. Then it makes sense to go to all the gurus and read all the self-improvement books. Only then. Before that, you will ignore everything. And that's why there is no change in your life if you do not understand your inner voice. And for some people, the reason why they change, they're not aware of this, but it's because they have changed the 2 inner voices. So, for instance, if I have a group of 1,000 people and all 1,000 people go to the Anthony Robbins course, of course, there will be a few 10, 20 people that make the change. But those people will already have made the change even without going to the course. It's just the motivational boost for them. They're in a different level. Their inner voice talks different to them. So my point is, you first have to work on your inner voice and then you can make a change. So let's get to the last part, because this is a very long, complicated video with a lot of stuff to unpack. So I will do one more. So let's take a look.
I was doing some research recently about why people change their beliefs and why they don't change their beliefs. And some beliefs they're more susceptible to take on. Some information they're susceptible to take on. One of the things I read about was when they believe the source. Another thing I read about was when it's good news. So in studies where they say to someone, you're more attractive according to the public than you believed, they're likely to shift rather than finding out they're less attractive. And also things like health. You're more healthy than you thought you were genetically. They're more likely to shift a belief. The nature of our beliefs and the nature of belief change. I was writing in my book about how looking in the mirror and telling yourself something, like some of the sort of modern day manifestation community believe, doesn't seem to work. Just looking in the mirror and telling myself that I'm beautiful and I'm rich and successful and powerful doesn't seem to be an effective way to cause actual belief change. Do you agree or disagree with this idea that you can look in the mirror and say something to yourself?
When we study belief and the change in belief, I'll answer it on 2 levels, Stephen. The first level is that in order for a person to change a belief or a perception about themselves and their life, the majority of those people made a decision with such firm intention that the amplitude of that decision carried a level of energy that was greater than the hardwired programs in their brain and the emotional conditioning in their body. As I said earlier, their body literally responded to their mind. The choice that they were making became a moment in time they would never forget. They'll tell you where they were, what time of day it was, who they were with when they made up their mind to change. It became a long-term memory. And the stronger the emotion we feel, the more altered we are inside of us, the more we remember that choice.
That's why we need pain sometimes.
That's when you painted yourself into a corner and you said, this is it. I don't care how I feel, body. I don't care how long it takes, time. I don't care what people think. I don't care what's going on in my life, environment. I'm going to do this. And you made up your mind. The moment you felt that emotion, you were aligning to a new future, and to change is to be greater than your body, to be greater than your environment, and to be greater than time. And so...
Okay, let's first use a psychological lens to look at belief in yourself. When we turn our gaze towards the power of self-belief, Albert Bandura's theory of self-efficacy takes center stage. Bandura proposed that an individual's belief in their ability to succeed in specific situations heavily influences their motivation and behavior. This theory emphasizes that fostering a robust belief can be a catalyst for positive change and personal achievement. Likewise, psychologist Carl Dweck's work on mindset underscores the significance, and nurturing growth mindset underscores the significance of nurturing A growth mindset, an attitude that embodies the belief that abilities and intelligence can be developed through dedication and hard work. This mindset therefore forms the foundational pillar in fostering strong self-belief and paving the path towards personal excellence and fulfillment. Okay, again, one final time, let's translate this complicated stuff to the inner voice, and let me know in the comments how you take control of your inner voice. So, does manifesting work? They talk about belief and that the majority of those people with real change made a decision with such a firm intention that the amplitude of that decision carried a level of energy that was greater than the hardwired programs in the brain and the emotional conditioning of their body, and that their body literally responded to their mind, and that people say, this is it, I have had it, I'm gonna do this. And then when you felt that emotion, you were aligning to a new future, and to change is to be greater than your body, to be greater than your environment, and to be greater than time. Attention. Again, wow, what a bunch of complicated stuff. I can only say it's like a poet when Joe talks, and he's very skilled at all those sound bites. But in my opinion, again, it all comes down to the inner voice. And why is it that some people do change? And why is it that that change is something they remember as a moment in time? This is the moment where I got to change. Of course, that's how the brain works. The brain works from an evolutionary perspective. When something very emotional happens, that's when things are stored in your brain. And that's for a reason. So the next time you remember it. Your brain has to deal with a lot of stuff. A lot of things come into your head, and 99% of that is ignored. So we have to have a system from an evolutionary perspective that stores the right things. And one thing to make that happen is when things are with a lot of emotion, then it's stored in your brain, and then you remember it much easier. And that's why in Hintor's perspective, we ask people, when did you start to change? They always come up with a story that moment, that's when that happened, then I started to change. But what does happen when you change? Again, before your change, your one voice was the dominant voice, and after the change, your other voice became the more dominant voice, and that's why you change. It's just like driving in a tank with two wheels. When you pull to the left side, you go that side, and when you pull to the right, you go that side. That's how it works. Also with your inner voice. Your inner voice control your life. And the story that Joe makes up, and it can be a story that about energy and more things and manifestation and all the things, is just explaining things from whatever point of view you want to explain things, but it all comes down to your inner voices. But I can go on forever on the rest of this video, but it would take up too much time. I suggest you watch the video and try to see if you can translate all the stuff, the complicated stuff they talk about, to the much easier to understand and perhaps even more logical explanation of the two inner voices. Let me know in the comments. So thanks for watching, and until next time. In the meantime, listen to your inner voice and take control of your life. And also let me know in the comments what videos you want me to make. Until next time.